Zalika had only been married for a few months when she moved into her husband's family home in the busy city of Makand. The streets outside were full of noise and life, but inside the house she often felt small and unseen. Every day seemed to bring a new test. If the tea was too hot, Mama Tisha complained. If the stew had too much salt, Auntie Nuru shook her head. Even when Zalika did everything right, they found something to criticize. They spoke to her with sharp tongues, reminding her that she was just a bride and still had much to prove. Sometimes the laughter from her sisters-in-law wasn't real laughter at all. It was a quiet way of mocking her. Zalika felt the weight of their eyes on her shoulders, judging every move she made. She wanted to please them, but no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed enough. At night, when the house grew quiet, she often sat by the window, looking at the city lights, whispering to herself that she would not let their cruelty crush her spirit. Deep inside, she carried a strength they had not yet seen, a strength that was waiting for the right moment to rise. Do you want me to expand the next outline to the grand gathering, 200 to 250 words? In the same emotional style? It was a bright Saturday morning when Mama Tisha called everyone to the sitting room. Her voice carried the kind of excitement that always meant trouble for Zalika. With a wide smile, she announced that there would be a grand family celebration the following weekend. 50 guests, she said proudly, her eyes shining as if she had just planned the event of the year. The whole compound buzzed with chatter, but Zalika felt her heart sink. She was about to ask who would help with the preparations when Mama Tisha's gaze landed firmly on her. Zalika will cook for everyone, she declared. Alone. The room went silent for a moment, then soft laughter broke out. Her sisters-in-law exchanged knowing glances, while Auntie Nuru whispered something that made the others chuckle. Zalika forced a small smile, but inside her chest tightened. 50 people? That wasn't a meal, it was an army to feed. She imagined the endless chopping, stirring, frying, and serving, and for a moment she felt her knees grow weak. But Mama Tisha wasn't done. Let her show us what she's capable of, she added, her tone sweet but sharp like a hidden knife. Zalika understood the game. They didn't want to celebrate. They wanted to watch her fail. Her husband, Baraka, sat quietly in the corner, avoiding her eyes. He didn't defend her, didn't speak up, just looked at the floor as though his silence could hide his shame. That cut Zalika deeper than the command itself. She longed for him to say, "She can't do it alone, we'll help her." But he didn't. She swallowed hard, nodding politely, even though fear rushed through her like a storm. That night, as the house filled with laughter and plans for the celebration, Zalika slipped into the kitchen. She ran her hands across the empty pots and heavy pans, whispering to herself, "If they want a battle, they will see my strength. Would you like me to now continue with 3? The hidden intention, 350 words. In the same voice? As the week passed, preparations for the gathering filled the compound with noise and excitement. To an outsider, it looked like a family getting ready for a joyful celebration. But beneath the laughter and chatter was a plan that only Zalika could feel pressing against her chest. Whenever she walked by, the conversations would suddenly grow quiet, and her sisters-in-law would cover their mouths to hide their whispers. Zalika knew those whispers weren't innocent. They were waiting for her to stumble, waiting for the moment when she would collapse under the weight of their impossible demand. Mama Tisha wore her sweetest smile whenever neighbors asked about the event. "Oh, our Zalika is such a wonderful cook," she would say, her voice dripping with false pride. "She will prepare everything for 50 guests by herself." The neighbors would widen their eyes in surprise, praising Zalika's strength, but inside the compound, Mama Tisha's true intention was clear. This wasn't about food. It was about breaking Zalika. She wanted the guests to see a bride who couldn't cope, a young woman who would stumble and sweat and panic, proving she wasn't worthy of her son Baraka. Even Baraka seemed trapped between two worlds. He watched his mother's games but said nothing. His silence, though, spoke louder than any words. Zalika sometimes caught him looking at her with worry, but he never defended her. He chose peace with his family over standing by her side, and that hurt more than all the whispers combined. Late one evening, Zalika overheard her sisters-in-law giggling outside her room. "Wait until the guests see the mess she makes," one said. "They'll finally know she's not fit for him." Their words stabbed at her heart, but she refused to let them hear her cry. She pressed her pillow to her chest and whispered to herself, "They will not break me. Not this time. Would you like me to expand for Zalika's silent strength 350 words. Next, keeping the same emotional, dramatic flow? Zalika sat quietly when Mama Tisha gave the final instructions for the feast. Her hands trembled in her lap, but she did not argue or beg for help. In the past she had cried when they mocked her. She had lowered her head when they pushed her into corners, making her feel small. But this time something shifted inside her. She refused to let them see her break. She pressed her lips together, nodded politely and walked away, carrying her fear deep in her chest where no one could touch it. Alone in her small room, she let the tears fall silently. She thought of her late mother, a woman who had once told her, "Strength is quiet, my child. You don't always have to fight with words. Sometimes you fight with action." Remembering those words, Zalika wiped her face, stood tall, and began to think. If she was going to cook for 50 people, she would need a plan, not just strength but wisdom. She listed every dish in her head, every spice, every pot she would use. She calculated the time each meal would take, the order in which she would prepare them. Her mind raced, but instead of drowning in panic, she held on to that tiny spark of hope. When her sisters-in-law passed her door, laughing loudly, Zalika pretended not to hear. She sat on the floor with a notebook and quietly sketched her menu. They thought silence meant weakness, but silence was her shield now. Deep down, she wanted to show them that she was more than just a timid bride. She wanted to show them that patience could be power, and endurance could be louder than insults. For the first time since she entered that house, Zalika felt a new kind of fire rising in her. She wasn't planning for food alone. She was planning for dignity, for respect, for the moment she would finally lift her head without shame. Do you want me to carry this same emotional style into 5? The long night of work, 350 to 400 words? That night, when the compound grew silent and everyone disappeared into their rooms, Zalika tied her scarf tightly around her head and stepped into the kitchen. The moonlight slipped through the small window, casting a pale glow on the rows of pots and baskets piled high with raw food. It felt overwhelming at first. So much rice, so many vegetables, piles of meat waiting to be cleaned and seasoned. For a moment her chest tightened and her hands shook. But then she took a deep breath, rolled up her sleeves and began. The sound of her knife striking the wooden board echoed in the quiet night. Chop after chop, she cut onions until her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't stop. She peeled cassava, pounded garlic and crushed spices the way her mother had taught her, letting the aroma fill the air with warmth and memory. She worked with a rhythm, as though each movement was part of a secret song only she could hear. The sweat on her forehead mixed with her tears, but neither slowed her down. Hours passed, and still she moved from pot to pot, stirring stews, marinating meat, preparing dough for fresh chapati. Every dish she touched carried not just flavor but her unspoken strength. She thought of the whispers, the laughter, the sharp words thrown at her, and with every turn of the spoon she told herself, "I will not give them the victory." Outside, the city of Makand hummed with distant music and laughter from late-night gatherings, but in the compound only the soft clinking of spoons and the bubbling of pots could be heard. The kitchen smelled of roasted spices, fried onions, and simmering sauces, scents so rich they seemed to hug the walls. By the time the first light of dawn began to stretch across the sky, Zalika's back ached and her arms felt heavy, but she refused to rest. She looked at the rows of prepared dishes and whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "This is not just food. This is my fight, and I will win it. Would you like me to continue with 6W?" By sunrise, the compound was alive with footsteps and chatter. The roosters crowed, children ran around the yard, and neighbors began arriving to help set up chairs and decorations for the big celebration. The house buzzed with excitement, but underneath it all, Zalika could hear the same whispers circling like flies. Her sisters-in-law stood in a corner, their colorful wrappers tied neatly around their waists, pretending to help Mama Tisha but mostly gossiping. "She looks tired already," one of them said, glancing toward the kitchen door. "By midday she will collapse." Another laughed quietly. "Wait until the guests see burnt food on their plates. She thinks cooking for 50 people is like cooking for 2. Their voices weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to cut. Zalika heard every word, yet she kept her head lowered, moving gracefully between the kitchen and the courtyard. Her eyes were heavy from the sleepless night, her arms sore from hours of stirring and chopping, but her spirit refused to bend. Every time she stepped out carrying a dish to arrange, She wore a calm smile that confused them. Mama Tisha's confidence grew with each passing hour. She walked around proudly, greeting relatives as they arrived. "Ah yes," she said to one auntie. "Our bride is handling everything herself. Today everyone will see her true colors." Her voice sounded sweet to outsiders, but inside the family, everyone knew the real meaning behind her words. It was not pride, it was a trap carefully laid. Still, Zalika moved silently, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She polished the serving trays, adjusted the spices in her pots, and whispered small prayers under her breath. Even though her body begged for rest, she carried herself with dignity, holding on to one thought. "They expect me to fail, but I will give them something they will never forget." By mid-morning, as laughter filled the compound and colorful fabrics swayed in the breeze, By midday, the compound of Mama Tisha's house had transformed into a sea of colors. Relatives poured in from every corner of Makand, their bright chitinge fabrics shining in the sunlight, their laughter filling the air. Children ran between chairs, elders greeted each other with warm embraces, and the sound of drums echoed faintly from a nearby street, adding rhythm to the festive mood. To the guests, it was a day of joy, but beneath the smiles of the family lay a secret expectation. They waited for the young bride to stumble. "Where is Zalika?" a curious auntie asked, fanning herself with a woven palm fan. "Is she truly the one cooking for all of us?" "Yes," Mama Tisha answered proudly, her voice dripping with hidden satisfaction. "She is in the kitchen. You will see her work soon enough." Her words drew murmurs of surprise, and some guests shook their heads in disbelief. Cooking for 50 people was no small task. Most women would have an army of helpers. Surely, they thought, the young bride would crumble under such pressure. But when Zalika finally stepped out, carrying the first tray of steaming dishes, the compound grew strangely quiet. Her scarf was neatly tied, her dress spotless despite the hours she had labored, and her smile was calm, almost too calm for someone who had been awake all night. She moved with grace, bowing politely to elders, greeting cousins with warmth, and offering water to the children before returning to the kitchen. Some relatives exchanged puzzled looks. "She does not look tired," one whispered. Another shook her head. "Maybe she is pretending. Let us wait and see." Zalika, however, wasn't pretending. Behind her quiet smile was a strength she had drawn from every insult, every mocking laugh, every heavy silence she had endured. With each step she took, she carried not only food but also dignity, a silent answer to the doubts hanging in the air. The compound waited for her to fall apart, but Zalika had already decided, today she wow. One by one, Zalika carried the dishes out of the kitchen, and soon the long tables in the courtyard began to look like something out of a dream. There was golden pulao rice, its aroma rich with cinnamon and cloves. There were pots of tender goat stew, simmered until the meat nearly melted at the touch of a spoon. Bowls of fresh vegetables glistened in colors that seemed too bright to be real, greens, oranges, and reds shining under the afternoon sun. She placed down plates of crispy fried fish, stacks of soft chapati, and trays of sweet mandazzi that smelled of cardamom. Every dish looked carefully made, every serving touched with the kind of detail that came from love, not just duty. At first, the guests were quiet, their eyes following Zalika as she moved gracefully between the tables. Some of them had come ready to pity her, expecting sloppy food and chaos, but instead they found themselves staring in disbelief. "Did she really make all this by herself?" an uncle whispered, adjusting his glasses. "Impossible." When the first plates were served, the silence broke. Guests leaned forward, taking careful bites, and the courtyard filled with gasps of delight. Laughter turned into murmurs of surprise. "This rice tastes like it was cooked by someone's grandmother," one woman said, smacking her lips. "Perfect, just perfect." Another nodded eagerly, adding, "The meat is so soft, how did she do this?" Mama Tisha sat at the head of the table, her confident smirk beginning to fade. She tried to hide her unease by sipping water slowly, but her eyes betrayed her. This was not the disaster she had planned. Instead, Zalika had created a feast that made the whole family proud, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And Zalika? She never rushed, never raised her voice, never asked for praise. She simply served with steady hands and a calm smile, letting her food speak louder than words. In that moment, the compound understood, they weren't just eating a meal. They were witnessing Just when the guests thought they had seen everything, Zalica returned from the kitchen with a dish no one had expected. She carried it with both hands, as if it were a treasure. The aroma was unlike anything else on the table, rich, smoky, and deeply comforting. She set it down gently in the center, and the elders leaned forward, curious. It was her late mother's recipe, a dish that had been passed down through generations in her family. It wasn't the grandest meal, nor the most colorful, but it carried a soul that no spice alone could create. The stew was thick, with tender pieces of chicken simmered slowly in groundnuts, tomatoes, and a secret blend of herbs her mother had once whispered to her in their small kitchen back home. For Zalica, this was not just food. It was memory. It was pride. It was her mother's voice reminding her, "You are stronger than what they say." When the first spoonful was tasted, the courtyard went quiet again. An old uncle closed his eyes and nodded slowly, savoring every bite. "This," he said softly, "this tastes like home." Others followed, and soon the whispers rose, not of doubt but of admiration. Some said the dish reminded them of their childhood, of the kitchens where their own mothers had once cooked with love. Others said they had never tasted something so perfectly balanced. Zalica stood silently, watching their reactions with moist eyes. She wasn't just feeding them. She was giving them a piece of her heart, a piece of her story. What her in-laws had meant to be her humiliation had become the stage for her greatest gift. Mama Tisha's face stiffened, her hands frozen around her cup. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. Zalica had not only succeeded, she had brought something unforgettable, something that connected every guest to her in a way no insult could erase. "Would you like me to continue with 10? The guest's reaction, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional, dramatic way? At first, the courtyard was full of noise, chatter, laughter, the clinking of cups, but the moment Zalica's food touched their tongues, the noise softened into silence. People looked at each other with wide eyes, their spoons paused in midair. It wasn't the silence of disappointment, it was the silence of surprise, the kind that came when words were too small to describe what they were tasting. Then came the murmurs. Low, excited voices filled the air. "This is extraordinary," an elder said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "The flavor, the balance. It is like she cooked with her heart." Another guest leaned over his plate and whispered, "This is not just food, it is memory. It reminds me of my grandmother's cooking." Soon voices rose and the courtyard filled with praises. Relatives who had expected to mock her now found themselves shaking their heads in admiration. Cousins clapped their hands, children begged for more chapati, and even strangers who had only come as neighbors called out Zalica's name, saying she was a treasure to the family. Zalica stood near the kitchen door, her scarf slightly damp from sweat, her hands folded politely in front of her. She did not boast or draw attention to herself. Her quiet smile was enough. Every praise that floated through the air was like a balm to the wound she had carried in silence. For months they had tried to break her, but today her hands, her patience, and her mother's recipe had spoken louder than their cruelty ever could. Mama Tisha's plan had unraveled before her eyes. Instead of humiliation, Zalica was now the star of the gathering. People praised her openly, declaring she had the gift of a true cook, someone who brought dignity and pride to the family. And as the compliments rained on her, Zalica realized this moment was bigger than food. She had turned their trap into her triumph, and everyone present had witnessed it. "Do you want me to move on with 11? The in-laws' shame, 350 to 400 words. In the Mama Tisha sat stiffly at the head of the table, her smirk slowly melting from her face as the voices around her grew louder in praise of Zalica. She had been so sure that the young bride would stumble, that the food would be late, tasteless, or poorly made. She had imagined the shame, the laughter, the whispers spreading through the family about how their son had married a woman who could not even cook. But instead, the exact opposite unfolded before her eyes. The guests couldn't stop talking. Every bite brought another compliment. "This girl has magic in her hands," one auntie said, licking her fingers. "Her husband is blessed." Another leaned closer to Mama Tisha, smiling warmly. "You must be so proud of your daughter-in-law. She is a rare jewel." Each word was like fire in Mama Tisha's chest. She forced a smile, nodding politely, but inside her heart twisted with anger and shame. Her sisters-in-law, who had laughed at Zalica just hours before, now sat quietly, their faces tight. They too had expected disaster, but they couldn't deny what they saw. A young woman who had worked through the night and turned the impossible into a triumph. Baraka, her son, looked at his wife with new eyes. While Mama Tisha seethed in silence, he couldn't hide the awe in his expression. The pride that his mother had wanted for herself now belonged to Zalika. Mama Tisha tried to cut through the admiration with small remarks. "Ah yes, she tried," she said lightly, "though she still has much to learn." But no one listened. The guests were too busy praising Zalika, calling her food unforgettable, her spirit remarkable. What was meant to be Zalika's downfall had become her rise, and Mama Tisha could do nothing to stop it. For the first time since Zalika entered that house, the power in the room shifted. The shame was no longer hers to carry. It sat squarely on the shoulders of those who had tried to break her. Shall I continue with 12? The husband's realization, 350 to 400 words. In the Baraka sat at the edge of the long table, his plate untouched, his eyes fixed on his wife as she moved between the guests. He had always seen Zalika as quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of woman who swallowed her pain rather than speak it out loud. He knew his family tested her, mocked her, pushed her into corners, and he had told himself it was just the way things were. He had chosen silence, thinking it was safer not to interfere. But today, as he watched her, something inside him shifted. Zalika was not the timid bride they had tried to paint her as. She walked with a calm confidence, her head high, her smile steady. She moved from table to table, serving food with grace, and every guest she passed showered her with praise. "Your wife is extraordinary," an elder said to Baraka, patting his shoulder. "Take care of her, for she will bring honor to your home." Baraka could only nod, his throat tight. For the first time he truly saw her, not as someone enduring cruelty, but as a woman of dignity and strength. She had faced the impossible, cooking for 50 people through the night, and instead of breaking, she had risen higher than anyone imagined. Shame burned in Baraka's chest when he thought of the nights he had sat silent while his mother and sisters ridiculed her. He had thought he was protecting peace, but in truth, he had abandoned her to fight alone. Now, as he watched the respect in the eyes of their relatives, he realized how deeply he had underestimated her. He felt both proud and guilty, proud that she was his wife, and guilty that he had not stood beside her when she needed him most. In that moment, Baraka silently vowed that things would change. He would never again let her carry battles in silence. "Do you want me to go on with 13? The guest of influence, 350 to 400 words. In the same powerful emotional storytelling tone? Among the guests that day was Mr. Kalanji, a respected community leader whose words carried weight far beyond the compound walls. He was a man the family admired, someone whose presence made people sit straighter and choose their words carefully. Throughout the meal, he had eaten quietly, observing everything with sharp eyes. When Zalika brought him a plate of her mother's special stew, he tasted it slowly, then placed his spoon down with great care. The courtyard grew still, for everyone knew he was not a man to give compliments easily. He rose to his feet, his tall frame commanding silence. "Family," he began, his deep voice rolling over the crowd. "Today I have eaten food prepared by this young bride, and I must say I am humbled." Heads turned toward Zalika, who stood frozen near the doorway, her hands nervously clutching her scarf. Mr. Kalanji looked around the table, his eyes lingering on Mama Tisha before continuing. "This meal is more than food. It is a reflection of patience, discipline, and love. What you have witnessed here is not the failure of a woman, but the strength of one." Murmurs of agreement filled the air. Guests nodded, some clapping softly, others whispering that his words were true. He lifted his hand to quiet them again. "A woman's worth is not seen in how much she is oppressed or tested," he said firmly, "but in how she rises above it. And today Zalika has risen. She has honored not just this family, but our community." The applause that followed was loud and genuine, echoing through the courtyard. Some elders stood to shake Zalika's hand, while the younger women looked at her with admiration, their eyes shining as if they too had been lifted by her victory. Mama Tisha forced a tight smile, but the respect that once belonged to her now belonged to Zalika. And Baraka, watching from his seat, felt his heart swell with both pride and a quiet ache of regret. His wife had not only won over the family, she had earned the respect of a leader. The courtyard, once filled with quiet whispers and hidden laughter, now echoed with applause and warm praises for Zalica. Guests leaned toward her, asking about her recipes, some even saying they wished their daughters could cook with such skill and patience. The energy had shifted completely, and the in-laws could feel it pressing heavily on their shoulders. Mama Tisha sat still, her lips pursed tightly, her earlier confidence gone. Her sisters-in-law, who had giggled the night before about Zalica's failure, now kept their eyes lowered, stirring their cups nervously. They had planned this day as Zalica's downfall. They imagined her rushing between pots, sweating and trembling, the food late or ruined, the guests leaving with stories of shame. But instead, every plate on the table had become her victory. The very stage built for her humiliation had turned into her moment of honor. No one mocked her now. No one laughed. Instead, people spoke of her as though she were the pride of the family. "You must protect her," one elder told Baraka. "Women like this are rare." The words burned Mama Tisha more than any direct insult could. Zalica did not gloat. She did not boast. She simply bowed her head politely whenever someone praised her, her calm smile hiding the storm of emotions inside. For months she had carried their cruelty silently, and now that silence had spoken louder than words. The lesson was clear. Dignity cannot be destroyed by malice, and strength cannot be hidden forever. The in-laws had thought they were proving her weakness, but instead they had revealed her strength to everyone. And though none of them admitted it out loud, they knew the truth. What they meant for disgrace had become the very thing that lifted Zalica higher than all of them. Shall I finish with 15? Zalica's victory, 350 to 400 words. In the same emotional storytelling style, when the last guest finally left and the courtyard grew quiet again, Zalica stood in the doorway, her body aching from the long night and day, but her heart steady and full. The tables were nearly empty now, only crumbs and scattered cups left behind, but the voices of praise still echoed in her ears. She had not only fed 50 people, she had silenced every doubt, every cruel whisper, every test they had thrown at her. Her in-laws avoided her eyes as they cleared the space, their laughter gone, their pride swallowed. Mama Tisha, who had once smirked with confidence, now moved stiffly, saying nothing. Zalica did not need to raise her voice or remind them of what they had done. The truth was already heavy on them. Baraka walked up to her slowly, his face soft, his eyes full of something she had longed to see: respect. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Zalica only gave him a small nod as if to say, "I carried this battle, but we both know the lesson now." She did not gloat. She did not shout. Instead, she stood tall, her quiet strength brighter than any celebration fire. What they had designed to break her had instead revealed her worth to the world. That night, as the moonlight washed over the compound, Zalica knew she had changed her story forever. It was no longer about survival. It was about triumph, unforgettable and unshakable.